And now to the biggest developing story today. It comes from Israel. The United States opened its embassy in Jerusalem. By moving it from Tel Aviv, President Donald Trump has fulfilled a campaign promise. He's also shifted America's position. It can no more claim to be a non-aligned player in the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. And Trump has triggered a new wave of deadly protests. Gaza erupted in anger today. More than 40 people have been killed, more than 2,000 injured. WION's West Asia Bureau Chief Daniele Pagani reports from Jerusalem.
US President Donald Trump's latest move fueled fresh tensions in West Asia. On a day when the US Embassy in Jerusalem was inaugurated, protest against the move intensified in Gaza. Dozens of Palestinian protesters were killed when the Israeli forces opened fire on them at the Gaza border. Tear gas shells rained from the skies as the protesters tried to evacuate those that were hurt. The protests that were on since March intensified on Israel's 70th anniversary last month. Back then, mosques in Gaza had urged the Palestinians to join the Great March of Return. This is a grassroots movement calling for the right of return of Palestinian refugees to their homes in the State of Israel. But despite the tensions, the US Embassy in Jerusalem was inaugurated with much fanfare. Around 800 people attended the ceremony.
If you follow the sign behind me, you would reach in barely 5 minutes the new building where the United States of America relocated their embassy from the coastal city of Tel Aviv to the wholly contested city of Jerusalem. By many in Israel, this is perceived as a victory, the fulfillment of a long-standing request to recognize Jerusalem as their own capital city. And this is also a victory for the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who can claim this victory and claim to be the man who finally convinced the United States to actually shift their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
The US President's daughter and advisor Ivanka Trump and her husband Jared Kushner had flown in from Washington to attend the festivities.
The United States will always be a great friend of Israel and a partner in the cause of freedom and peace. We wish Ambassador Friedman good luck as he takes up his office in this beautiful Jerusalem embassy, and we extend a hand in friendship to Israel, the Palestinians, and to all of their neighbors.
We have no better friends in the world. You stand for Israel and you stand for Jerusalem. Thank you. What a glorious day. Remember this moment. This is history. President Trump, by recognizing history, you have made history.
Washington argues that the move to shift the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem will create greater regional stability. Both the Palestinians and the Israelis claim Jerusalem as their capital. The city contains sites sacred to both Jews and Muslims. Palestinians refuse to accept Trump's decision. They have vowed to step up their protests. When Gaza witnessed fresh clashes, thousands marched in central Ramallah. Protesters gathered at Yasser Arafat Square, dressed in black t-shirts. They waved the flag of Palestine and were seen holding up placards designed as keys. These protesters were demanding their right over the disputed territory.
And on the Palestinian side, this is perceived as a defeat. One more element that tells them that they are more and more isolated in the world, that Arab countries who did not vocally decided to fight back against what was the decision of the United States of America are now doing, which is being very much focused on Iran and perhaps having forgot the long-standing Palestinian struggle to an independent state. Daniele Pagani from Jerusalem for WION.
It's the bloodiest day in Gaza since the 2014 war. Why has this move drawn such a strong response? Why is the shift of the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem so controversial? Here's a quick explainer. Jerusalem, as we know, is a city with Jewish, Christian and Muslim holy places. Israel describes it as its united and eternal capital. But 70 years ago, when the UN voted to partition Palestine into Jewish and Arab states, Israel was defined as a separate entity under international supervision. But the war that followed Israel's declaration of independence 1 year later left Jerusalem divided. When the fighting ended in 1949, Israel was in control of the western half and Jordan was in control of the eastern half, which included the famous Old City. During a war in 1967, Israel occupied East Jerusalem. And since then, all of the city has been under Israel's authority. Palestinians and many in the international community continue to see East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state. In July 1980, Israel passed a law declaring Jerusalem the united capital of Israel. The United Nations Security Council responded with a resolution condemning Israel's annexation of East Jerusalem and declared it a violation of international law. In fact, before 1980, a number of countries, including the Netherlands and Costa Rica, had their embassies in Jerusalem. After 1980, all these countries moved their embassies out of Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. The US has never had its embassy in Jerusalem, but in 1989, Israel began leasing to the US a plot of land in Jerusalem for a new embassy. The 90-year lease cost $1 every year. The plot is an empty field to date. In 1995, the US Congress passed a law requiring America to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, as they thought the US should respect Israel's choice of Jerusalem as its capital. But every president since then, Clinton, Bush and Obama, have declined to move the embassy, citing national security interests. This is Palki Sharma Upadhyay for WION. The empty plot is now the US Embassy in Jerusalem. Daniele Pagani, our West Asia Bureau Chief, is joining us live from the Holy City. Daniele, is the situation in Gaza under control now? Is the protest expected to spill over to other parts in Palestine?
I don't think you can ever define the situation in Gaza under control, especially now. If you are talking about the current, specifically the current situation, it seems that waters have calmed down for today. Tomorrow is another very tough day. It's expected to be even tougher than today. Remember that tomorrow there are remembrance everywhere around the Palestinian territories to remember what they call the Nakba, the catastrophe, the moment when they were pushed out of their own territories by the Israeli advancing. We've just heard, I would say, tale of two stories, despite how strange it may seem. We've seen the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, saying, quote unquote, what a glorious day. And when he was saying that, at least more than 10 Palestinians had already been killed in Gaza. So this is exactly what is happening right now. On the one hand, we have a celebrating Jerusalem where flags are everywhere, where billboards are thanking Donald Trump are everywhere. And on the other side, we have Palestinians protesting against what they perceive a violation of their right to at least bring out their voice, their willingness to have Jerusalem recognized as their own capital city.
Right. Jerusalem is also a city that almost always has security personnel out on the streets. Do you sense that their numbers are bigger today? And to put this in perspective for our viewers, Daniele, the anger we know has been simmering for the last 6 months. Protests against the embassy move have not ceased, but the casualties have only been on the Palestinian side. No Israelis killed.
Well, this is normal because when this is an absolutely asymmetrical confrontation. We have an army, a regular army made of snipers and soldiers and well-trained snipers and soldiers fighting against a group of more than 40,000 people, but only armed with stones and tires, and eventually some of them, we cannot rule out, might have some personal weapons, but it is an asymmetrical confrontation, so this is why no casualties on the Israeli side. When it comes to the security level of the city, personally I do not sense that numbers are increased as of now. I do sense a heavy atmosphere. Just one example, I was walking in the bazaar inside the Damascus Gate behind me, which leads inside the walls of the old city, and many of the Arab shopkeepers were looking at videos coming out from Gaza, stopping me, evidently recognizing me as a journalist, requesting me to go to Gaza and showing me videos. So there was a sense of anger, a heavy atmosphere, and that can absolutely become something way more violent than just words tomorrow maybe.
Right. Daniel, thanks very much for holding fort for us there, and stay safe. Israel, Palestinian parts at least, on the boil over this move of the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This is a developing story. And we have some breaking news coming in a surprise move. The Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, has decided to reshuffle his cabinet. Piyush Goyal has been given temporary charge of the Finance and Corporate Affairs Ministries. He is currently the Minister of Railways and Coal. This is after the present Finance Minister, Mr. Arun Jaitley, today underwent a kidney transplant. Piyush Goyal has also served as Minister of State with independent charge for power, coal and new and renewable energy in the Government of India in the past. The next change is that in the I&B Ministry, the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, Colonel Rajyavardhan Singh Rathore will take additional charge of the Information and Broadcasting Ministry. He is currently serving as the Sports Minister of India. The minister who's leaving that charge, Smriti Irani, will only handle the Textile Ministry now. This is the information that we have, and this comes just a day ahead of the election results in Karnataka. The two may not be related, but it's an interesting move, a surprise move, as we say, from the Prime Minister of India. So China's latest carrier is bigger than India's only operational carrier, INS Vikramaditya, which is about 44,000 tons. The type 001A is bigger than India's first indigenous carrier, the Vikrant, which will displace about 40,000 tons and carry 30 to 40 aircraft. It is expected to enter service by 2020. But the latest Chinese vessel is smaller than the US Navy's oldest carrier, the USS Nimitz. At 64,000 tons, the Chinese vessel is much smaller than the USS Nimitz, which displaces 120,000 tons, almost double. The crew is also smaller, 2,600 to 3,200. The Chinese vessel is steam-powered versus nuclear power for the Nimitz. The top speed is about the same, 31 knots, 31.5 knots. Huge difference in terms of onboard aircraft, 44 versus 90 for the Nimitz. And all this translates into an endurance of 90 days for the Chinese ship against unlimited for the Nimitz. That really is the game changer. The Nimitz's stay at sea is only constrained by maintenance issues and adequate food supplies for the crew. The Nimitz is a super carrier. The US Navy has a total of 11 carriers, all of them nuclear powered. The Nimitz is the oldest, having been built in 1975. The buzz is that the Chinese are planning to build a type 002, which is going to be bigger, about 80,000 tons and possibly nuclear powered. India has no plans for a nuclear-powered carrier, but it is planning a 65,000-ton carrier in a few years from now. That's how things stand. A series of protests by the marginalized Pashtun community has taken the country by storm. The Pashtuns living in Pakistan's northwest have spilled onto the streets of Lahore in the thousands. What are their demands? What is this ethnic minority protesting against? Our next report takes a closer look.
Rarely do people in Pakistan come out on the streets against the country's army and security forces. But hundreds of brave Pashtuns did just that. They hit the streets of Lahore demanding justice for their fallen brothers and action against Pakistan Army's excesses in areas bordering Afghanistan. What makes this even more significant is that this rally attracted a large crowd despite pressure from Pakistan's security apparatus to call off the event. Activists claim 1 million Pashtuns have been displaced, at least 65,000 people have been killed and about 35 million have disappeared in Pakistan. According to Amnesty International, 700 cases of enforced disappearances from Pakistan are pending with the United Nations. But the community will not back down. And the man who has been instrumental in mobilizing the Pashtuns is this young leader, Manzoor Pashtun.
To those who calls us traitors, let me prove it to you who is a traitor from Pakistan's constitution. Article 19 says that the people have the freedom of speech. And Article 6 says that someone who sabotages the constitution is clearly a traitor. How many times these generals have sabotaged this constitution?
Pashtuns make up for 15% of Pakistan's 207 million people. And the country's second largest ethnic minority has found its political voice. Now, there is no stopping them. This crowd in Lahore is testament to that very fact. Forced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, and other alleged rights abuses. The allegations aren't new. But the manner in which they're being flung at the government definitely is. Successive governments in Pakistan have crushed dissent and rubbished the allegations. But with elections approaching in the country, it may not be easy to dismiss them this time around. Bureau Report, WION.
At 26, this young man is taking Pakistan by storm. A tribesman, a human rights activist, a hero, Manzoor Pashtun, is known by many names in his country. He's single-handedly leading thousands against a common enemy in Pakistan. But what makes him so special? Here's a look at how this young leader became a hero for his community.
पाकिस्तान के आईन में आर्टिकल 19 है कि लोगों को इज़हार राय की आज़ादी है.
He's the man mobilizing thousands. He's the face of Pakistan's oppressed. He's the man responsible for highlighting Pakistan Army's excesses on a global fora. Manzoor Ahmed Pashtun, a bearded tribesman from Pakistan's northwestern region, is causing quite a stir. It's hard to imagine that a 26-year-old is leading Pakistan's second largest ethnic community in revolt.
दिगर मसाइल के लिए हमने ट्रुथ एंड रिकंसिलिएशन कमीशन बनाने का मुतालबा किया.
Pashtun was just a child when the United States-led war on Taliban began, and it wasn't long before it was at his doorstep. But Pashtun had made up his mind. He will make the country's administration pay for their crimes. The young and charismatic leader started the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement in 2014. But it wasn't until January this year that the movement gathered momentum. After the death of Naqibullah Mahsood, an aspiring model who was killed by security forces during a raid on Pakistan Taliban militants, Pashtun has led several rallies against the country's federal government. Manzoor Pashtun's demands are very clear. Release the people forcefully abducted. If they have committed a crime, try them as citizens of the state. Secondly, establish a judicial commission that assesses the legitimacy of extrajudicial killings committed so far. And lastly, that paramilitary forces should stop harassing Pashtun families under the garb of search operations. While their protests are peaceful and their demands well within the limits of the law, the pressure it has placed on Pakistan's leadership is telling. This young man has single-handedly made the entire Pakistani administration lose their sleep. Bureau Report, WION.
Hundreds of people rallied in Moscow to demand the unblocking of the Telegram app. It is the second protest in the Russian capital since the authorities blocked the popular messaging service last month, and protests are not very common in Russia, which is why this is making headlines. Demonstrators chanted anti-government slogans and brandished signs carrying messages against internet censorship. Some tossed paper planes in the air, symbolizing Telegram's logo. Telegram was blocked on the 16th of April this year on orders from state communications watchdog Roskomnadzor after refusing to grant Russian state security access to its users' encrypted messages. Russia's Federal Security Services said that it needs such access to guard against security threats, such as terrorist attacks. But Telegram has said that compliance with the order would constitute a violation of the privacy of its users. In the process of blocking the app, the state watchdog has also cut off access to a slew of other websites. Some 20 people were detained at the rally.
These people today want to know what we are thinking about, the way we communicate, exchange messages, and steal away yet another freedom given to us by the Constitution, correspondence privacy, our private lives. They want to take this away from us too. The internet is the main freedom that exists for all of us today. We cannot let that happen.
They are using the fight against terrorists and well-being of children as pretext for blatant censorship, which I think goes along with the interests of the authority.
The authority persistently tightened its grip on the internet. trying its powers on some parts of it like Telegram. It is a repetition of the Chinese scenario when a firewall was established to block people off from the rest of the world.